Hey folks, so this is the Mate 20 Pro from Huawei. I've got it here in my hands and it is a gorgeous, gorgeous looking phone. You can see it's got the twilight finish on this particular model here. And there's that camera pod that we knew was coming with a triple camera system and dual color dual LED flash in the top left corner. Huawei branding, of course, and yeah, let me show you a little bit around. There's a whole lot of information to be absorbed here. So the front display here, as you can see, is like a 6.4-inch AMOLED panel. It's 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio, 2K resolution, yes, 2K. And it does have some sort of depth sensing camera system at the top. It's a 24 megapixel front-facing camera, but it does have a whole bunch of additional sensors for depth sensing. Unfortunately, that depth sensing system is not compatible with Google Payment. So you will not be able to pay with your face unlock like you do with an iPhone on this phone yet. But you will be able to use it to do pretty much everything else. Unlock the phone in an obviously more secure way than just using a camera system. Then, of course, there is a tiny little bezel at the bottom, and maybe a little bit at the top as well, but that's it. This is a very similar display to what we've seen on the Galaxy and Note. It kind of waterfalls on the edges here. Pretty much what you'd expect from a modern display today, but with a notch. So let's talk about those cameras. I mentioned them earlier, but there's actually a lot to talk about it here. It's not the same, quite the same setup as we've seen on the P20 Pro, because instead of a monochrome lens, it has an f/2.2 20 megapixel ultra wide angle. So basically what we've seen on the LG G7 and other LG phones before. So this now has a 3-time optical iOS stabilized lens that's 8 megapixel for zoom. It has a 40 megapixel RGB sensor, and it has a 20 megapixel ultra wide angle. Now the RGB sensor still has an f/1.8 lens, and as I said, the wide angle is f/2.2. The zoom is f/2.4. So that's a bit of a difference. Why did they get rid of the monochrome? It turns out they're not really using it very much on the P20 Pro. The data that it brings to the table is not necessarily as much as they thought, simply because the sensors and lenses have gotten so good. Or so they claim. But the proof will be in the pudding when I start using this. Now you notice that I've shown you the phone extensively, but I haven't shown you there's something missing, right? And that's the fingerprint reader. Well, let me show you where that lives. It is right here under the display, right? So let me show you again real quick. There we go. It's pretty quick. It's the first in-display fingerprinter I've used that's actually pretty damn fast. And so there it is. It's an in-display fingerprint reader. In terms of the rest of the specs, there's a Kirin 980 that's Huawei's latest chip on board, and I'm not exactly sure what the RAM, they didn't tell us. I think it's 6 or 8 gigs, and you've got some nominal amount of storage, 64 to 128 gigs, I assume. These are numbers I don't have, so I will have to confirm later. But what's interesting is that they did bring wireless charging to this phone. It has wireless charging, and it can charge another phone. It can act as a Qi charger, which is really kind of insane. What a great idea, right? When they announced that, I was like, well, of course you do that, but of course it wasn't my idea. So what else is there to be said? So there's another little odd thing. At the bottom here, you'll notice there's the usual USB Type-C port and some sort of SIM slot for the dual SIM system. It turns out that one of those dual SIM slots takes something called a nano SD card. It's a new kind of memory card that Huawei is introducing. I'm not sure if it's anything like a standard, but they're betting that if you want more storage on your phone, you'll be able to buy a card from them and stick it in one of those 2 SIM slots in that SIM tray, nano SD. So will this be a standard that other phones use? Will this be something proprietary to Huawei? The verdict is still out. By now you've probably noticed that the power lock button is red, or at least pink or purple, or some other color that's slightly closer to red, which is a nice little accent. They did that on the P10 originally, and they carried it over here. You probably also noticed that there's an infrared transmitter on the top here. And that's kind of interesting, as well as a secondary mic. So other than the volume rocker and power key on the right-hand side, you've got the pretty much nothing of note on the left-hand side, because the SIM slot and USB Type-C ports are at the bottom. And of course the primary mic. Also notice you don't see a speaker at the bottom, and that's because it's integrated in the USB Type-C port, and it's stereo speakers, so the earpiece acts as a second speaker. So there you have it, the Mate 20 Pro. This is really quite the phone, and it's really quite compact despite its large display size. It's pretty narrow, feels really nice in hand. It's nice, not too heavy. It's obviously glass in the back, and you know, it's got all the flagship spec you expect. But interesting choices on this new camera system, this new depth sensing face recognition system, the in-display fingerprint reader, the wireless charging that goes both ways. All interesting things. No headphone jack, as you noticed. And if you've been paying attention, here is the regular Mate 20, not Pro. And this one is an LCD panel. Let me actually crank the brightness up a little bit. It's a little dim right now. So there you go. This is wider. And to prove it to you, let me just put them side by side here. And you'll see, this is a wider phone for sure. So there you go. The Mate 20 here on the left and the Mate 20 Pro on the right. The definitely a little wider. And of course the other differences are that it has an LCD IPS panel and it does not have a notch. So as you can see, it's a teardrop shape, and there's a little bit of bezel at the bottom. But it's more of a 17.5 by 9 aspect ratio versus 19.5 by 9. I think more like, well, close to 18 by 9. But has that tiny little teardrop shaped notch and in front facing camera system. It does have a headphone jack, which is interesting. And the camera system is slightly different, believe it or not. There's actually a slight difference here. You see the fingerprint reader, of course, since it doesn't have an in-display reader. But it does have, instead of the 40 megapixel f/1.8 main sensor, it's a 12 megapixel f/1.8 main sensor, very much like the P20 Pro had slightly different RGB sensors. And the wide angle, ultra wide angle, is a 16 megapixel instead of a 20 megapixel f/2.2. So small differences in performance on these two phones. The processors are the same, the amount of memory, etc. Options, I'm not quite sure the RAM and the storage choices, but we expect 4 to 6 gigs on this phone with something like 64 to 128 gigs of storage. On the left side here you have a SIM slot, dual SIM. I'm not sure if it supports that nano SD format. You get the speaker, USB Type-C, and primary mic at the bottom, as you can see here. You've got volume rocker and power button on the right hand side, again with a red accent on the power lock key, very cool. And at the top you still see the infrared transmitter, so if you want to, oh actually no, yes, it's right there. I thought that was it, but it's the headphone jack. There it is. So it does have that as well, and of course the secondary mic. So a little wider, a little cheaper probably, because it doesn't have the in-display fingerprint reader, doesn't have wireless charging, has a slightly decontented camera, has a slightly lesser display, even though this is actually a bigger display. It's almost a 7-inch display. Actually, maybe not quite, 6.5 or 6.6. I need to check the specs. So they bombarded us with so much information here on this briefing. So there you go. Mate 20 on the left and Mate 20 Pro on the right. Very, very interesting, very, very cool phones. Really looking forward to getting my hands on, particularly the Mate 20 Pro for its camera system and the in-display fingerprint reader. So I'll keep you posted as I find out more, and thanks for watching. And remember, this is just an hands-on video to complement my podcast, mobiletechpodcast.com. You should subscribe to the channel, like this video, tell your friends, but most importantly, listen to the podcast, mobiletechpodcast.com. I'm also on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Stitcher, Slacker, TuneIn Radio, everywhere. Just search for Mobile Tech Podcast. And if you can't find it easily with that, just add Tanker on my Twitter handle, TNKGRL, to that. All right, folks, cheers, and stay tuned for more videos.